The funeral smelled like money and grief. White lilies lined the casket in thick, heavy rows, their scent so strong it sat on the back of your tongue like something sweet gone bad. Around the grave, 43 men in black suits stood without moving, without speaking, without looking at each other. That was the code. You didn't cry. You didn't fidget. You stood like stone and let the silence say everything your mouth never would. Marcus DeLuca stood at the front. He kept his hands clasped in front of him and his eyes on the mahogany casket. Dominic Reyes had been a good soldier. Loyal. Quiet. The kind of man who did what he was told and never made problems. Marcus had respected that about him. He didn't have many feelings about the death itself. Feelings were expensive, and Marcus had learned a long time ago not to spend what he couldn't afford to lose. The priest was still talking. Marcus wasn't listening. He was counting the gaps between the bodyguards, noting which men were watching the tree line, deciding whether the floral arrangement on the left was blocking Chen's sight line to the east gate. This was how Marcus attended funerals. Not as a mourner, as a commander. Even standing over a grave, he was working. Then he heard the beads. It was a small sound, soft and quick, like rain on a tin roof, a rapid, rhythmic clatter coming from somewhere behind the crowd. Marcus didn't turn his head, but his eyes shifted. The men near the back moved first. A ripple went through the black suits like something had disturbed still water. Then Marcus heard Miller's low voice, "Hey," and a sharp rustle. And then the clatter of beads grew louder, faster, closer. She came through the crowd like she had somewhere urgent to be. A small girl in a blue dress. Her braids flying behind her, the colorful beads at their ends swinging and knocking together with every stride. Her dress had a white collar that was now crooked. Her shoes were dusty. She was breathing hard, and her eyes, dark and wide and burning, were locked on Marcus like she had memorized his face from somewhere and come a very long way to find it. Chen stepped directly into her path with both arms out. She stopped, looked up at him, then stepped around him like he was a lamppost. Someone in the crowd made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a gasp. Marcus silenced it with one look. Then he turned fully to face the girl for the first time. She stopped 3 feet from him. Her chest was heaving. A thin scratch ran along her left arm, like she had pushed through something sharp to get here. She looked up at Marcus DeLuca, a man who made grown men lower their eyes, and she did not look away. The priest had stopped talking. Everyone had stopped everything. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then, in a voice he kept very quiet, he said, "This is a private service." "I know," she said. She wasn't apologizing. She was just stating a fact, the same way he had. "You need to leave. I need you to come." She took one small step forward. "He's beating my mama. Right now. While we're standing here." Her voice broke on the last word. Just barely, just for a second, and then she pulled it back together with a swallow and lifted her chin. "Please. You're the man who fixes things. Everybody says so." 43 men were holding their breath. Marcus studied her face. The scratch on her arm. The way her hands were balled into fists at her sides, not out of anger, but because she was using every ounce of herself to hold it together in front of a graveyard full of strangers. He had a code. Everyone here knew it. Civilian matters stayed civilian. Personal problems were not his problem. The DeLuca name existed above the noise of the streets, not inside it. He looked at the casket, at the lilies, at the small girl who had run through a line of armed men because she had no one else to run to. "What's your name?" he asked. "Chioma," she said. "Chioma Anthony." Marcus unclenched his hands. "Miller," he said quietly. "Bring the car around." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Miller didn't move right away. He stood with his hands at his sides and his mouth slightly open, which was something Marcus had never once seen in the 4 years Miller had worked for him. Chen turned his head slowly. The way a man turns when he is certain he has misheard something, but doesn't want to embarrass himself by asking twice. Marcus didn't repeat himself. He never did. Miller closed his mouth, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the car. That was the thing about working for Marcus DeLuca. You didn't ask questions. You didn't make faces. You read the room, you followed the order, and you sorted out your confusion privately, on your own time. Chen was not quite as composed. "Boss." His voice was low, careful. "The way you speak near something that might break. We're in the middle of. I know what we're in the middle of." Marcus was already moving, his long strides slow and unhurried, as though he were simply stepping away to take a phone call. Send someone to finish representing the family. Romano can stand in. Romano. Chun repeated the name like it tasted strange. Romano, Marcus said again, final as a door closing. Behind them, the 43 men in black suits had not moved. They stood in the same formation, around the same grave, under the same gray sky. But the silence had changed. It was no longer the respectful kind. It was the stunned kind, the silence of men watching something they had never seen before and were not sure they were allowed to react to. Marcus DeLuca was leaving a funeral. For a child. Chioma walked beside him with 2 steps for every one of his, her beads quiet now that she wasn't running. She was watching him from the corner of her eye the way small animals watch something large. Not with fear exactly, but with careful attention. Ready to change direction fast if she needed to. He opened the back door of the sedan himself. She climbed in without being told. He followed. And Chin shut the door behind them and moved around to the front without another word. The car pulled away from the cemetery slowly, tires quiet on the wet gravel path. Marcus looked straight ahead. Address. 14 Brecker Street, Chioma said immediately. She had been holding that address in her mouth the whole time, ready. Apartment 4C. The elevator's broken, so you have to take the stairs. The 3rd step from the top makes a loud noise, so if you want to surprise him, skip it. Chen's eyes moved to the rearview mirror for just a second. Marcus said nothing. But something shifted in his jaw, a small, tight movement, there and gone. She had already planned it out. A 7-year-old had already thought about how to approach the door quietly. What that meant, what kind of life it took to teach a child to think that way. Settled into the car like a weight and stayed there. How long have you been gone? Marcus asked. Since after breakfast. She folded her hands in her lap. I walked to the church first, because someone there said you'd be at the big funeral today. Then I walked here. Marcus looked at her then. Really looked. Her shoes were worn at the toes. There was a faint bruise along her right knee, half hidden by the hem of her blue dress. She had walked, alone, across how many blocks, he didn't know, through a city that ate children like her for breakfast. To find a man she had only heard about in whispers. You walked here by yourself, he said. Yes. She said it without pride or drama. Just fact. The car turned onto the main road. Rain began to tap lightly against the windows. Marcus faced forward again, his expression unreadable, his hands resting still on his knees. Chun kept his eyes on the road and said absolutely nothing, because in 4 years he had learned that silence was sometimes the only correct response. In the wing mirror, the cemetery shrank and disappeared. Marcus DeLuca, the most disciplined man in the city's underground, had just walked away from a funeral, a code, and 43 watching eyes. For a girl in a blue dress. He didn't explain it. He didn't need to. He was already on his way. The sedan moved through the city like a dark current. Outside, the streets were waking up in the way they always did after rain. Vendors pulling covers off their carts, pigeons stepping carefully around puddles. A woman in a yellow coat arguing with a parking meter. Normal things. Daylight things. The kind of ordinary world that existed right next to the other one, and never quite touched it. Inside the car, nobody spoke. Chioma lasted 4 minutes. Marcus knew because he had been watching the clock on the dashboard without meaning to. Curious, in a distant sort of way, how long she would hold. Your car smells like cologne and secrets, she said. Chun made a sound in the front seat that he quickly turned into a cough. Marcus didn't look at her. Does it? And the seats are very cold. She shifted, pressing her palms flat against the leather. Why are the seats cold if you're rich? Rich people on TV have warm seats. I don't watch TV. She considered this seriously, as though it explained several things about him. Then she turned and looked at Chun, then at Miller, studying them both the way a person studies a painting they aren't sure they like. They don't talk much, she said. No, Marcus agreed. Is that because of you or because of them? This time Chun didn't bother hiding it. A short breath escaped him, and he pressed 2 fingers to his mouth and stared very hard at the road. Miller, to his credit, remained completely still, though the back of his neck had gone slightly red. Marcus turned his head and looked at Chioma for the first time since they'd left the cemetery. She was looking back at him with a calm, open expression, no embarrassment, no awareness that her question was unusual. She simply wanted to know. Both, Marcus said. She nodded slowly. My teacher says that when people don't talk, it's usually because they're scared or because they think they're important. She paused. Which one is it for them? Chioma. Yes. Look out the window. She did. But only for about 30 seconds. Then she turned back. That man at the funeral, she said. The tall one with the gray hair. He looked angry when you left. He was surprised. Because you don't usually leave for things like this? No, Marcus said. I don't. She was quiet for a moment, turning this over. Outside, the city scrolled past. A barbershop, a laundromat, a bodega with plastic chairs out front. A group of boys on bicycles cut across an intersection without looking, fearless in the way that only the very young could afford to be. Do you have children? Chioma asked. The question sat in the car differently than the others. Flatter. Heavier. No, Marcus said. Oh. She looked down at her hands. I was going to say that's maybe why you came. Because you know what it feels like to be worried about someone. She picked at a loose thread on her dress. But maybe you just came because it was the right thing. Marcus said nothing. She looked up at him. Did you come because it was the right thing? The buildings outside were getting shorter now. The streets were getting narrower. They were moving from the part of the city that had flower shops and doormen into the part that had iron bars on windows and mailboxes with broken locks. Marcus watched the neighborhood change and thought about her question the way he thought about most things, carefully, from a distance, looking for the angle. He didn't find one this time. I came, he said, because you asked. Chioma studied his face for a long moment, the way she had studied Chun and Miller, searching for the thing underneath the surface. Then, apparently satisfied with whatever she found, she nodded once and turned back to the window. Okay, she said quietly. The car slowed as Chun turned onto Brecker Street. The buildings here leaned toward each other overhead, like tired old men. A dog barked somewhere behind a fence. A light was on in a fourth-floor window. Apartment 4C. Chioma's hands tightened in her lap. The thread she had been picking at finally came loose. She didn't look scared. She looked like someone who had been waiting a very long time for help to finally arrive. 14 Brecker Street was the kind of building that had given up. Not all at once. Buildings never fell apart all at once. It happened slowly, the way it always did. First a light bulb in the hallway that nobody replaced. Then a crack in the front step that nobody filled. Then the paint peeling off the walls in long, curling strips. Like the building itself was trying to shed its skin and become something else. Something that hadn't seen so much. Marcus stepped out of the car and stood on the pavement. He didn't move right away. He just looked at the building the way he looked at everything. Measuring it, reading it, letting it tell him what it knew. The front door was metal, dented near the bottom from years of being kicked open. 2 of the 4 buzzers beside the door had no names on them. A child's bicycle was chained to the railing with a combination lock, which meant someone here still believed in protecting small things. Chioma was already at the front door, holding it open. The code is 144, she said. But it doesn't lock properly anyway. You just push. She pushed. The door swung open with a groan that echoed up through the whole entrance. Marcus followed her in, with Chun behind him and Miller taking the rear. The hallway smelled like cooked onions and damp concrete and something else. Something underneath those smells, older and harder to name. Marcus knew that smell. He stopped walking for just a second, right there in the entrance, and something moved through him that he hadn't felt in a very long time. Not fear. He was past fear. It was the memory of fear, the ghost of it, pressing cold fingers against the back of his neck. He had grown up in a building that smelled like this. Not this exact building. Not this exact city block, but the same kind of place. The same brown walls. The same broken overhead light that buzzed and flickered and never quite went out, but never quite worked properly either. He had been very small, and the hallways had seemed enormous, and he had learned very early how to walk quietly, how to make himself light, how to read the sounds coming from behind closed doors before he got too close. He had thought he'd left all of that a long time ago. He started walking again. Chioma led them to the staircase. The elevator had a handwritten sign taped to its doors that said out of order in thick letters, with a smiley face drawn underneath it that felt more sad than cheerful. Marcus looked at the sign for a half-second longer than necessary, then followed Chioma up the stairs. She counted the steps under her breath. At the top flight, she stopped before the 3rd step from the landing and stepped over it carefully, landing on the 4th with practiced ease. She looked back at Marcus and pointed down at the step. He nodded, stepped over it. Chun and Miller did the same. The hallway on the 4th floor was narrow and dim. 3 doors. The one at the far end, 4C, had a strip of yellow light showing beneath it. From somewhere behind it came a sound. Low. Irregular. The sound of a voice moving between quiet and loud without any pattern, the way a storm moves. Chioma stopped in front of the door. She turned around and looked up at Marcus, and for the first time since the cemetery, the composure she had been carrying so carefully slipped, just slightly, just at the edges, like a mask that had grown too heavy. Her eyes were bright. Her jaw was tight. "She's in there," she whispered. Marcus put one hand gently on her shoulder and moved her to the side of the door, away from the frame. He looked at Chun, then at Miller. A long look, steady and clear. They understood it without words. They always did. Then Marcus stood in front of the door and was quiet for a moment. Behind it, the voice rose. Then something fell. Then silence, the worst kind of silence, the kind that comes after. Marcus had spent 20 years building a life that was nothing like this hallway. Nothing like this smell, nothing like this sound. He had not left it far enough behind. He raised his hand and knocked. Nobody answered. Marcus knocked again. Same pressure. Same pace. Unhurried, the way a man knocks when he already knows the door is going to open. Behind him, Chioma stood against the hallway wall with her arms folded across her chest. Chun was 2 steps back and to the left. Miller mirrored him on the right. The hallway felt smaller than it had a minute ago, the ceiling lower, the air thicker. Then footsteps. Heavy. Uneven. The kind that belonged to a man who was used to not being careful about the noise he made. The door swung open. Terrence Boyd was a big man gone soft in the wrong places. Wide through the shoulders, thick through the middle. With a face that might have been handsome once before something mean had settled into it permanently. He was in a gray vest and dark trousers. And there was a smear of something on his left forearm that Marcus didn't look at directly, but registered completely. Terrence looked at Marcus. Then at Chun. Then at Miller. His expression moved through several things very quickly. Surprise, then confusion. Then the particular kind of irritation that belongs to men who don't like being caught off balance in their own space. "Who are you?" he said. "A friend," Marcus said. "Can I come in?" He didn't wait for an answer. He stepped forward, and because Marcus DeLuca moved the way he moved steadily, without hesitation, as though the path was always already his, Terrence stepped back without meaning to. The door opened wider. Marcus walked through it. The apartment hit him all at once. It wasn't large. A sitting room that connected to a small kitchen, with 2 doors on the far wall, bedroom and bathroom, he noted automatically. The television was on with the volume low, casting a pale blue light across a room that was otherwise dim. A chair was knocked sideways near the window. A cup lay on its side on the kitchen counter, its contents dried in a long stain down the cabinet door below. And in the corner of the sitting room, Chioma Anthony sat on the floor with her back against the wall. She was a slight woman, maybe 30, with Chioma's same dark eyes and Chioma's same quality of stillness. The stillness of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. Her bottom lip was swollen. She was holding her left wrist against her middle with her right hand, and when the door opened she looked up with the expression of someone bracing for more. Then she saw Marcus. She didn't know who he was. That was clear. She looked at the white shirt, the calm face, the 2 men behind him, and confusion moved across her features, fragile and cautious. Like she couldn't afford to hope yet. Marcus held eye contact with her for just a moment. A small nod. He turned back to the room. The white shirt was almost strange in here. It had no business being in this apartment, in this light, against this smell of stale air and something sour, and the particular heaviness that settles into rooms where bad things happen regularly. Marcus was aware of it the way you are aware of a clean thing in a dirty place. Not with pride, but with a sharp, clear sense of contrast. Terrence had found his footing again. He pulled himself up to his full height and crossed his arms. "I don't know you," he said. His voice was steadier now. "And I don't know what you think you're walking into. But this is my house. It's a rented apartment," Marcus said mildly. "And the lease," he glanced around the room slowly, deliberately, "appears to be under some stress. You need to leave." "I will," Marcus said. Shortly. He moved to the knocked-over chair, set it upright with one hand, and sat down in it the way a man sits in his own office. Relaxed. Patient. Completely at home. Terrence stared at him. Marcus looked back with eyes that were perfectly calm and absolutely empty of anything Terrence could use. "Sit down, Terrence," Marcus said quietly. The name, his own name. spoken by a stranger who had no business knowing it, hit Terrence like a cold hand on the back of the neck. He sat down. The television kept playing. Some afternoon program with a bright set and a laughing host. The sound turned so low it was just shapes of noise, cheerful and meaningless and completely wrong for the room. Marcus didn't reach for the remote. He let it play. Sometimes silence made men like Terrence nervous in ways that were harder to control. And Marcus preferred things he could control. He looked at Terrence the way he looked at spreadsheets. Calmly, searching for the number that didn't add up. Terrence was trying to hold his posture, shoulders back, chin up, arms still crossed, but his eyes were doing too much work. Moving to Chun, to Miller, back to Marcus, to the door. The eyes of a man running calculations he didn't have the intelligence to complete. I don't know what Danielle told you, Terrence started. She didn't tell me anything, Marcus said. Chioma did. Something shifted in Terrence's face. A tightening around the mouth. She's a child. She doesn't understand what goes on between adults. She understood enough to walk across 12 city blocks alone to find help. Marcus tilted his head slightly. How old were you when you stopped being afraid of anything, Terrence? I'm curious. Terrence blinked. It wasn't the question he'd been preparing for. Because most men, Marcus continued, his voice still mild, still unhurried, who put their hands on women who are smaller than them. They're not actually brave. They're just very, very frightened. Of small things. Unpaid bills. Being ignored. Being ordinary. He paused. Which one is it for you? You don't know me, Terrence said. His voice had a warning in it, low and tight, the voice he probably used to end conversations in this apartment. The voice that had worked, until today. I know exactly who you are, Marcus said. He reached into his jacket pocket slowly, deliberately, making sure Terrence watched every movement, and produced a folded piece of paper. He opened it and held it up without handing it over. It was a printed page. Terrence's full name at the top. Below it, numbers, dates, an address in another district. A name Marcus had underlined in pen during the drive over, while Chioma had been looking out the window. Terrence's face changed completely. Your employer, Marcus said, is a man named Sal Fricano. Sal owes my organization a considerable amount of money and has been enjoying a certain amount of patience on our part. He folded the paper neatly and returned it to his pocket. That patience is a resource, Terrence. Like water in a tank. It runs out. The television laughed softly at something. Terrence uncrossed his arms. His hands moved to his knees instead, and Marcus noted the change the way he noted everything, quietly, without expression. What do you want? Terrence asked. His voice was different now. Smaller. The warning was gone from it. Nothing from you, Marcus said. You have nothing I want. He let that land. Let Terrence feel the specific weight of being told he had nothing worth taking. What I want is for this to be the last room you ever raise your voice in. In this building. On this street. In this city, if I decide I'm still thinking about you next week. Terrence swallowed. You're going to leave this apartment tonight, Marcus said. Not because I'm threatening you. I want to be clear about that. His tone was almost pleasant. Almost. I'm simply informing you that the life you had here, the power you thought you had here, it's already gone. It left when I sat down in this chair. You just haven't finished feeling it yet. Across the room, Danielle had not moved from the wall, but her hand had loosened around her wrist. She was breathing differently now, slower, deeper, the way a person breathes when the thing they have been bracing against finally stops pressing. Terrence looked at Marcus for a long moment. Then his eyes dropped to the floor. It was a small movement. Barely anything. But Marcus had been reading men his entire life. And he knew what it meant. It meant the paper tiger had finally stopped roaring. It meant the room belonged to someone else now. Marcus straightened his white shirt, stood up from the chair, and turned toward Danielle. Ma'am, he said quietly. Your daughter is outside. Danielle stood slowly. She used the wall behind her to help, pressing her palm flat against it and pushing herself up in stages, the way a person moves when several parts of them hurt and they are trying not to show how many. She kept her injured wrist close to her body. Her eyes moved from Marcus to the door and back again, like she was measuring the distance, making sure it was real. She took one step forward. That was when Terrence moved. He was off the sofa before anyone fully processed it. Not fast, but sudden, the way a cornered animal moves. Not with a plan, with a habit. He crossed the room in 3 steps and grabbed Danielle by the arm, pulling her back and to the side. putting her between himself and Marcus the way men like him always did when the walls started closing in, using the thing they claimed to love as the thing that kept them safe. Danielle made a small sound. Not a scream, just a sharp intake of breath, tight and controlled, the sound of someone who had learned that screaming made things worse. Chun moved immediately. "Hold," Marcus said. Chun stopped. Miller, who had shifted his weight forward, went still. The word had been quiet, barely above a murmur, but it landed in the room like something solid. Terrence stood with his arm across Danielle's shoulders, breathing hard, his eyes jumping between the three men in front of him. Whatever calculation he was running, it wasn't working. His jaw was tight. A vein moved along the side of his neck. He looked like a man who had picked up something too heavy and couldn't figure out how to put it down without dropping it on himself. "Let her go, Terrence," Marcus said. "Back up," Terrence said. "All of you. Back up or I swear." "You swear what?" Marcus asked. His voice hadn't changed at all. Same pace. Same temperature. He hadn't moved a single step forward or back. He just stood in the center of the room in his white shirt with his hands loose at his sides, watching Terrence the way a man watches weather, with full attention and no urgency. "Think carefully before you finish that sentence. Take your time." Terrence's mouth opened, then closed. The television murmured cheerfully behind him. "Here is what's happening inside you right now," Marcus said, almost gently. "You're scared. That's real. And I understand it. But you've spent so long using fear as a tool that now, when you feel it yourself, the only thing your hands know how to do is grab something." He looked at Danielle, just briefly, just enough. "That's not strength, Terrence. That's a habit. And habits can be broken." Danielle was very still. Her eyes were on Marcus, and in them was something that had not been there before. Not quite trust, not yet, but the beginning of the idea that trust might be possible. "She's not a shield," Marcus said. "She's a woman with a broken wrist and a daughter in the hallway who walked halfway across the city this morning because she loves her mother. Let her go." The last three words were the same volume as everything else he had said. That was the thing about Marcus DeLuca that men like Terrence could never quite prepare for. He didn't get louder when he was serious. He got quieter. And somehow the quieter he got, the more space his voice took up, until it was the only thing in the room. Terrence's arm dropped. Danielle stepped forward immediately, quickly, and Marcus moved slightly to put himself between her and Terrence without making a performance of it, simply adjusting, the way water adjusts around a stone. Chun was at Danielle's side in 2 steps. He guided her gently toward the door without touching her injured wrist, his big hands surprisingly careful. Terrence stood alone in the center of the room now. His arms hung at his sides. He looked smaller than he had when he'd opened the door, not physically, but in the way that mattered, like something had been removed from him, something he had been carrying as a weapon for a very long time. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. "You're going to want to be gone," he said quietly, "before I finish seeing them to the car." He turned and walked to the door. He didn't look back. Chioma was exactly where Marcus had left her. She was standing in the hallway with her back against the wall and her arms still folded across her chest. And she had the particular stillness of a child who has been waiting so long and so hard that moving feels dangerous. Like it might break whatever fragile thing is holding the moment together. Then the apartment door opened and Danielle came through it. Chioma unfolded immediately. She crossed the hallway in 2 steps and pressed herself against her mother's side, her arms going around Danielle's waist, her face turned into her shoulder. She didn't make a sound. No crying. No words. Just the simple, complete relief of a child returning to the place they belong. Danielle bent over her with her good arm, her cheek resting on top of Chioma's head, and closed her eyes. Marcus watched this for exactly as long as it took him to understand what he was looking at. Then he turned away and walked to the staircase, giving them the moment in the only way he knew how, by removing himself from it. At the bottom of the stairs, he made 2 phone calls. The first was to a woman named Iris who managed 3 residential properties on the west side of the city for the DeLuca organization. He told her he needed a 2-bedroom unit made available by evening. Clean, functional, safe building, ground floor or second floor only. She asked no questions. She never did. He hung up after 40 seconds. The second call was longer. He spoke to a man named Ottoline who handled what Marcus privately called administrative corrections, situations where a person's presence in a particular life needed to be quietly, permanently restructured. He gave Ottoline Terrence Boyd's full name, his employer, his address in the other district, and 3 other pieces of information he had gathered during the drive to Brecker Street. He told Ottoline what outcome he required. Ottoline said he understood. Marcus hung up. By the time Danielle and Chioma came down the stairs, both calls were finished and Marcus was standing on the pavement beside the car, his phone back in his pocket. His expression the same as it always was. Danielle stopped in front of him. She had Chioma's hand in her good hand, and she stood very straight. The way people stand when they are determined not to appear as damaged as they feel. Her lip was still swollen. There were things in her eyes that would take a long time to sort through. Relief and exhaustion, and a complicated kind of gratitude that didn't quite know how to arrange itself into words. "I don't know who you are," she said. "That's fine," Marcus said. "Chioma said you fix things." She glanced down at her daughter briefly, then back at him. "I didn't know she'd gone to find you. I didn't ask her to." "I know," Marcus said. "She decided that herself." Danielle looked at him steadily. "What happens now?" "There's an apartment on Mercer West. 2 bedrooms. It will be ready this evening." He reached into his jacket and produced a plain white card with a number on it. No name, no address, just digits. "The building is managed by people I trust. The rent is handled for the first year. After that, there's a job available at a logistics company on 5th if you want it. Office work. Regular hours." Danielle stared at the card, then at him. "Why?" It was the same question Chioma had asked in the car, dressed in different clothes. Marcus considered giving the same answer. Instead, he crouched down to Chioma's level. She looked at him with those steady, serious eyes that had looked at him across a graveyard full of dangerous men without flinching. "You did a brave thing today," he said. "I did a necessary thing," she corrected him. The corner of Marcus's mouth moved. Almost nothing. Almost a smile. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small item. A flat silver coin, old and worn smooth on one side, with a single engraved letter on the other. He placed it in Chioma's palm and closed her fingers around it. "If you ever need something fixed," he said quietly, "you show that to someone who knows what it means." Chioma looked at her closed fist, then at him. "Will they know?" she asked. "Everyone who matters," Marcus said. "Will know." The drive back was quiet. Not the loaded, careful quiet of the drive to Brecker Street, where every silence had been full of things nobody was saying. This was a different kind. Easier. The kind of quiet that settles after something has been resolved. Not perfectly, not without cost, but resolved. The way a room feels after a window has been opened. Marcus sat in the back seat and watched the city move past. The west side gave way to the main roads. And the main roads widened into the part of the city where the buildings were taller and the streets were cleaner, and everything was designed to look like nothing difficult ever happened here. Marcus had spent 20 years building his life into this part of the city. Moving toward it, belonging to it. He looked at it now through the window and found it looked slightly different than it had this morning. Not worse, not better, just different. The way a familiar room looks different when you come back to it after a long time away. Chun drove without speaking. Miller had his elbow on the door and his eyes on the side mirror. At some point, without any discussion, they had both understood that today was not a day for conversation. Marcus was grateful for it. He thought about the coin. It was an old thing, something his father had given him in a different life, in a different city. When Marcus had been very small and the world had seemed very large and mostly dangerous. His father had told him it was a lucky coin, which Marcus had stopped believing at around age 9. He had kept it anyway, not for luck but for the weight of it. The way it sat in his pocket like a small, solid fact. A thing that stayed. He had not planned to give it away. He wasn't sure, even now, at what point he had decided to. He thought about Chioma standing in that hallway. The way she had stepped around Chun like he was furniture. The way she had counted the stairs quietly. Her small voice running through the numbers as though she had done it 100 times. The scratch on her arm. The worn toes of her shoes. The way she had said, "I did a necessary thing," with the calm certainty of someone twice her age and half her size. He thought about Danielle closing her eyes with her cheek on her daughter's head. That single, private moment in the hallway that he had turned away from. He thought about the building on Brecker Street. The smell of the hallway. The flickering light above the elevator. He thought about how his feet had known, without being told, to move quietly on those stairs, because some part of him had never really left buildings like that one. Some part of him had been walking those halls his entire life. The car turned onto Aldrin Avenue, and the DeLuca building came into view, glass and dark steel, clean lines, a door that opened before you reached it. Marcus looked at it and thought about the white shirt. He had worn white for years as a kind of armor. A signal. It said, "I am not in the mess. I am above the mess. I arrive clean, and I leave clean, and nothing that happens in between touches me." He understood now that he had been reading it wrong. The shirt wasn't armor. It wasn't distance. It was the opposite. In a hallway full of darkness, in a room full of damage, in a city that had too many corners where frightened people sat on floors and waited for something to change, a white shirt was visible. It was a marker. It said, "Something different has entered this room. Something that doesn't belong to the dark. Not untouchable. Just distinct. Just clear." Miller opened the door and Marcus stepped out onto the pavement. The evening air had cooled. Somewhere down the street, a vendor was closing up his cart, stacking things away with the routine patience of a man who would be back tomorrow. A child on the opposite pavement was pulling her father's hand towards something she wanted him to see. Marcus straightened his shirt. He stood there for a moment on the clean pavement outside his clean building and let the day settle into him. All of it, the lilies, the beads, the hallway, the coin. The small firm voice sang, "I did a necessary thing." Then he walked inside. He had a ledger to rewrite.